Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, agnosticism, atheism, antitheism, antireligionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudo-history, pseudo-morality, things that are found in religion.
Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
It's going.
Good.
I've just been working this morning on the first pottery cultures of Europe. So,
oh yeah,
you're like, oh, that sounds boring.
Sounds like a lot of reading.
Well, the point it goes along with the same point of the capitalism and stuff, arcane capitalism. It's showing this new things are happening before pottery, and the reason why pottery is important, just so people know. Because then people are like, who cares, right? Well, pottery allows you to do things like store grain.
Right.
See, something that if you don't have pottery, you don't get storage. Then, of course, most people would once again, because they don't know archaeology, like, who cares about storage? Well, when you start to store things, it means that you can have abundance. When you can have abundance, then you can, in a sense, you have wealth. Like people talk about money, right? Wealth. In fact, one of the cultures, the linear pottery culture, which I think really relates to the arcane capitalism, they kind of, to me, like started inventing it. Not intentionally. I don't think it's like they thought, I'm going to do this. I think it's more because of events and outside influence and their influence in each other, it started to happen. One, because they were selling things. Why? Because they had bulk, right? They now had bulk. Other people that had pottery but didn't have grains were using it for other things like cooking stews and stuff, maybe tubers and, potatoes or whatever, or other kind of stuff, even wild grains maybe they pick, but mainly it's going to be meat and whatever, that you throw in a pot and, you can cook now in a sense, different than just throwing it over like fire. But they also, they used rocks and they used ground. There's other ways of cooking. But pottery, like I said, besides the cooking aspect, pottery allows you to store things, liquids and solids, and like butter from cows or whatever, or cheese.
Right.
I'm saying it gives you this whole range of stuff. why that's important. That's why I wanted to figure out who, when, where, because it helps. Me, I don't just like to be able to make statements. I want to make statements that I can back up by this fact, that fact, that fact, that fact, that fact, that fact, that fact. Hey,
right.
Maybe I'm wrong, but you tell me. All them facts, they just can't be accident. Anyways, so the linear popular culture in some more like southern Germany, northern Germany, especially near Denmark, was, I'm probably going to say the name wrong, but Eckenbrock culture. I'm sure I'm saying totally wrong, whatever. Anyways, but they were hunter-gatherers that had pottery, but didn't really do agriculture.
Okay.
But there's domestic grain that they were eating. Well, where the hell do you think you got it but the people in southern Germany?
Right.
So in other words, they're selling or trading, to me it's selling because this is just words.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, trading and selling aren't
they're trading wealth in a sense. I can, like value, whatever. They're one value for their value. And that actually they were even if I remember reading right, they were even making tools and stuff specifically to trade. They didn't want them.
Okay.
They're doing them to trade. So they're already marketing and, of course, now you have to have people making this. So the linear pottery culture, band pottery culture, it doesn't really have that different than what we would think of as traditional roles almost today.
Oh, okay.
It was, first off, it's more patriarchal,
right?
Which is different, I think, than if you look at, Turkey, where the stuff came from 9,000 years ago. Then by 7,000 years ago or whatever, it's already becoming different. So that's like Maria Gimbus or something like that. It's an archaeologist that did stuff on the old Europe and also the Indo-Europeans, which has to do with like even the language of English that we're speaking now, and how they took over. And she says that the old Europe was not patriarchal, and the newcomers, she says, I think it's like at 5,000, not 7,000, like I say.
Okay.
We're patriarchal. But the problem is the linear band pottery culture is absolutely patriarchal. So they come from Hungary and by way of the Balkans, thus what she would call old Europe.
Okay.
And from Turkey, which I agree wasn't. So something between the Balkans, which I think is where it really happened. In other words, non-patriarchal people went to the Balkans, met people that were patriarchal, and then an offshoot of that was the linear band pottery culture, which then goes and takes it to another level.
Okay.
Oh, it's not good enough just to be patriarchal. Hey, we can actually trade things. We can actually own land. We can actually have bigger crops, bigger farms, bigger things. And why is all that important? It means nothing if you're just feeding your family. It means everything for trade.
Right, right.
And that's why I wanted to figure out these cultures to be able to prove deeper what I'm saying about trade. I mean, how the heck are these other, and it's a couple hundred miles away, whatever, but these other people having domestic grains and they don't have agriculture,
Right, right.
They're being sold in a sense. So that's why it's important, because it's not the fact that just selling, like say an artisan, I'm going to be an artisan, or how I see it. I don't know. I told you, I haven't really read Marx, so I can't claim everything he says. But in general, to me, an artisan is a person not doing capitalism because they're doing their own. No one's stealing their labor.
Right, right.
I mean, you may think the same thing. I don't know exactly, but to me, as an artisan, if I'm a jeweler and I make it out of my thing and then I sell it out of my thing, that's not capitalism. Now, once I hire someone and then I gouge their labor, well, then that to me, we're getting into capitalism.
Right.
And this is an important thing too for me. I know anarchists care more about it probably than socialists, but wage slavery. Wage slavery has been talked about since Greece and Rome, and I see it in Egypt.
Okay.
And I also think it was occurring to me in the linear band pottery culture.
Okay.
Men did hunting and made hunting tools for trade. Women did pottery and stuff in the home. And also to me, I think they had a duel in some of the farming. which of course then their labor was taken and given to other cultures.
Right.
To benefit the men. So even if you want to try to say that I'm wrong, women were being wage slavery probably.
Right.
Then also these cultures, including the one in Çatalhöyük, which I told you before, there's a problem because some people call it Çatalhöyük in Turkey, where the stuff originates, like the people come and ideas. That some people call it anarcho-communism, because I agree it's not exactly capitalism, but
Right.
I don't agree. Or they'll say it's matriarchal. No, well, I think it was like two separate cultures. The hunters and the gatherers are separate. More women and gatherers, more hunters, and they're both hierarchical.
Oh, okay.
Unto themselves.
Ah.
And I think semi-equal in relation to each other, in a sense. So it's two hierarchical, so not equal.
Right. There were still people above each other within those various. Yeah.
Exactly, like the mother superior or something, or the
Right.
priest father, or whatever you want to call it. So, but they relate. No, those are definitely still in a very patriarchal system. Where I don't think that was occurring in Çatalhöyük. I think it was separate but equal, or what you would kind of call it.
Okay.
But as we know, in the history of the world, separate but equal has never really been equal.
Right.
That's just a term people like to use,
Separate often just means not equal.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why, as an anarchist, I want no separation.
Yeah.
Because I get deeply, especially as studying history and stuff and prehistory, deeply how the separation. It's this mine, all mine, only mine, my family, whatever, and then I can take yours, and then it's also mine. I mean, this mentality is the problem.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's like the creation of we're the in group and you're the out group.
Oh, absolutely.
It creates a sense of superiority and.
Right, and so you don't have that as much in Çatalhöyük. I mean, they're both sort of equal but separate, but they're both getting the same amount of food, sort of. Men are getting more wild. Women are getting more domesticated animals because they're staying at home, not hunting. But the children are the ones that suffer. So this is also later carried into the linear band pottery culture, where you see adults given more respect and children not. Okay. So I think in the history of all this, that children have always been suffering, and then it's been women, maybe equal, almost suffering, but in a sense different kind of suffering.
Right.
Yeah. And I do believe that children's labor was being stolen. I always feel like no one ever talks about. They'll go, "Oh, I'm against child labor," and I was like, "Yeah, wouldn't it be suck if children had free?" Like almost all families kind of do.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Now I think that cleaning their own area or doing some stuff is different than, like, my father had me go and help him build houses.
Right. Yeah. But didn't pay you. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which is just a code word, which capitalists like that too. Oh, this is a learning opportunity. That's why I'm going to pay you nothing.
Yeah. Internships.
Hey, internships. That's what we call those bullshit things.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get to work, but not get paid.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, so this goes to my problem. And also, I think, to me, sometimes things are semantics. People want it to fit their semantic ideas for things. Like I said, I think it's Aristotle and Cicero. So from Egypt, from Greece and Rome are both talking about wage theft or wage slavery. So these are not, and I think you're going to read it too, but there's an anthropologist, is also an anarchist like us, and he says that petty bourgeois have basically, since the beginning of civilization, which I would say somewhere around the linear band pottery culture 7,000 years ago, you'd have to say civilization. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
Not great.
No,
I don't.
But it's
think
there.
The history of civilization's been that great, but yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's, and I'm probably talking, fast, and people. I have blogs that can explain more, and definitely go read more. I'm not being dogmatic about having to say that capitalism started. I just don't like the fact that people feel they make, to me, fallacy statements. If there's slavery, there can't be capitalism. Wrong. You're going to read about that. If there's fascism, not fascism. If there's feudalism, there can't be capitalism. That's
right.
wrong. If there's monarchy, there can't be capitalism. Wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of that sort of stuff, like the idea that feudalism and capitalism aren't compatible, or that one, like, there's a lot of discussion about that. A lot of people believe that.
Well, and my point is, I think they were mixed economies. And I think that's from 7,000 years ago down, it's mixed economies. Before that, it's socialism. Like I said, it was separate but equal. I mean, basically everyone got equal. Everyone kind of shared. Even though they were different, they shared. Yeah. Even when they went to the thing, they shared. So I don't buy the anarchist part. I told you, me personally, anarchism, sorry, we lost that in Africa. Once we left Africa, most of the civilization has been non-anarchist. Maybe a few offshoots or whatever, I'm not saying it didn't happen ever. I'm just saying as a culture phenomenon.
Right.
In animism, it is very, very normal to have anarchism. And so that's why, too, when people say, oh, anarchism hasn't worked. Yeah, it only worked the whole almost swath of human history. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's right.
But after that, it was basically levels of socialism. Not all equal, but just kind of levels of sharing. But more, like I said, insular to your group, generally, not always out groups. But still, it was definitely in the group. It's socialism. I mean, it is like, do we think... Also, I would say to someone, they go, oh, well, it can't be. Oh, do you think that socialism can't happen in one country but not another?
Right.
Yes, I do. Oh, well, then it can happen in a culture and not another culture.
Yep.
So anyways, I think that's some of that where I have a problem talking to a lot of these historians is they're like, no, they don't even think about what they're. And I'm not saying Marx wasn't bright, wasn't a genius, come up with great ideas. Not saying that the knowledge that he had. I've studied prehistory like super hardcore, so most people don't even have the grasp, and they also like don't think exactly like me. Where I'm not intentionally, but I challenge this thinking. I don't agree with just because you say it. I want. Right. Can I prove what you just did? Does that make logical sense? And I'm just saying is that I've seen a thing before of dialectical Marxism that says it starts in tribalism and then slavery and then feudalism and then capitalism. Problem with that is, to me, that's like an all or nothing thing. I'm not saying that it kind of didn't do that.
Right. Seems overly simplistic, though.
Exactly. So it's not that if you said that to me, I would go, yeah, it's kind of accurate. So it's not like it's not wrong. When people say that capitalism is natural, that's wrong.
Right. Yeah.
I don't even have to bullshit. That is fucking wrong. And in fact, every time it was happening, including the linear band pottery culture, people died. So the instillment of capitalism has always been war. And they always say, oh, socialism leads to war. But capitalism leads to war. What are you talking about? From the beginning to me.
The reason that socialism leads to war is because capitalists want to stop it from happening.
Exactly. And that's what we had that talk last time that I said to him when he said that, we need to have revolution, violent revolution or whatever, because it's never worked otherwise. And I'm like, yeah, because when has the U.S. ever let a freaking country choose to have socialism?
Right. Exactly.
Well, they even hear about it. What? Whoa. Down there with guns and bombs and whatever and artillery. And if not doing it directly, they supply it to the people that are fighting supposedly communists.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
That's
no matter how bad they are.
Well, yeah, they are. But America is horrid. And if you really think about what it's done against the right to have a choice to choose socialism, that's disgusting.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, don't just throw America because there's a whole bunch of other capitalist countries that do that shit too.
Yep.
So I'm not singling only America. Fuck that.
Yeah.
But anyways, I did this. In other words, people need to understand too. I wasn't going to do this video. It's just that talking to several people and they keep saying I'm wrong or they don't agree, and I'm thinking, I think they don't really understand what I'm saying.
Right. A lot of times they seem to be disagreeing with things that they are thinking you're saying rather than the things that you're saying.
Right. And I understand there's a lot I know other people don't know. And so that's what this is kind of trying to address. And so I'm going to let Cory do a lot of reading because there's no way of understanding without being told.
And that's going to be my main contribution today because I've been on night shifts for 9 days. So my
feel for you.
brain isn't really functioning as at 100%. But so reading is my, I can do that.
Right on.
Okay. All right. So we're going to Damien. Societies start with primitive anarchism and socialism, at least 100,000 years ago, and are seen as in animist-only thinking that is now largely limited to southern Africa today. Then they lose systematic anarchism, possibly by 50,000 to 40,000 years ago, but keeps socialism or primitive communism with the emergence of totemism, largely limited to Europe and then spreading out from there. And to Damien, arcane/primitive capitalism emerges at or around 7,000 to 5,000 years ago in Central Europe, especially southern Germany or surrounding areas, and then spreads out from there. The primitive accumulation of capital. In Marxian economics and preceding theories, the problem of primitive accumulation, also called previous accumulation or original accumulation of capital, concerns the origin of capital and therefore of how class distinctions between possessors and non-possessors came to be. Adam Smith's account of primitive original accumulation depicted a peaceful process in which some workers labored more diligently than others and gradually built up wealth, eventually leaving the less diligent workers to accept living wages for their labor. Karl Marx rejected this account as childish for its omission of violence, war, enslavement, and colonialism in the historical accumulation of land and wealth.
Yeah, I would agree. I just say it happened 7,000 years ago when it started because there's massive war, massive killing, taking of people's property, different sizes of property, different accumulations of wealth.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's something I can agree with. Marxist scholar David Harvey explains Marx's primitive accumulation as a process that principally entailed taking land, say, enclosing it and expelling a resident population to create a landless proletariat, and then releasing the land into privatized mainstream of capital accumulation. Just off the top of my head, like that's clearly what happened in North America, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, there's no way you can deny that.
Right. And like I would say, you can clearly see it in Greece. You can see it in Rome. All these places that took over areas. I mean, Greece took over. People always go, Cleopatra, she's Egyptian. Actually, she's Greek.
Right.
With some Egyptian influence or DNA, but it's after Greece had already taken over. So when you think that it's the great Egyptian empire, it had already fallen. Right.
And actually, I guess like the British Empire.
Exactly. Colonialism. Well, that's another thing too. Do you think colonialism happened and it couldn't be capitalism? I mean, I just it's just like I sent you that one meme that says, if slavery is having 100% of your labor taken from you, at what point does it become capitalism?
Right.
In other words, how many percentages? I've talked about this before, right? Have I not?
Yeah.
Last time with him, I said, if I hired Cory to work with me and I give him 95% of his labor, is that really capitalism? The problem is capitalism is the fact of only giving you the 5% and taking the 95 for themselves or whatever. Right. I mean, it's taking the majority, and that's the same thing. At what point is it slavery? If they take 50%? 60, 80. I mean, that's all I'm saying too. I want everyone to do is think about what I'm saying, and don't start with some that I know already. Think about this. These are just terms that people have given meaning to. All words.
Right.
So this word that we're saying has these behaviors, like they say, it's the you don't own your labor in a sense. Okay.
Right.
Well, then there's a lot of things that can be associated with that.
Yeah, for sure. which I guess we're getting into a little bit here. The etymology of the term capitalist and capitalism. The term capitalist, meaning an owner of capital, appears earlier than the term capitalism and dates to the mid-17th century. Capitalism is derived from capital, which evolved from capital, a late Latin word based on caput, meaning head, which is also the origin of chattel and cattle. In the sense of movable property, only much later to refer to livestock. Capital emerged in the 12th to 13th centuries to refer to funds, stocks of merchandise, sums of money, or money-carrying interest. By 1283, it was used in the sense of the capital assets of a trading firm and was often interchanged with other words: wealth, money, funds, goods, assets, property, and so on.
Right, and that's why I always say to people, see, as an axiologist, I don't care much about the words. I want the value and the justification for them.
Right.
So that's why a lot of times people have problems with me, because I don't care about your terms. I want to what gives that term meaning?
Right, yeah.
And then what's the good justification that it is limited to that? And if it's not limited, well, then you need to broaden it. But if you broaden it, then I'm right.
Right, and that's kind of the core of communication too, right? Like, you can use terms in certain ways, but if you and I don't understand it the same way, based on the same set of criteria, then How are we communicating?
So, obviously, you see that I haven't been doing it well because I keep talking to socialists, and they keep going, "No, I don't agree with that at all."
Well, one of us is using this term in different ways than the other way. So, yeah. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. This says the Hollands, or in German, Holländisch. Mercurius uses capitalists in 1633 and 1654 to refer to owners of capital. In French, Etienne Clavier referred to capitalists in 1788, 6 years before its first recorded English usage by Arthur Young in his work Travels in France in 1792. In his Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, David Ricardo referred to the capitalist many times. English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge used capitalist in his work Table Talk in 1823. Pierre Joseph Proudhon used the term in his first work, What is Property, in 1840, to refer to the owners of capital. Benjamin Disraeli used the term in his 1845 work, Sybil. And just before I continue, I know that there's going to be a lot of, there's Marxists who know Proudhon, because Marx talked a lot of shit about Proudhon.
Okay.
But Proudhon was one of the, I guess, people who we recall as the original, quote unquote, the original anarchists. Like, started writing about anarchism and statelessness and stuff like that in a time when not many other people were doing that. But
right on.
The initial use of the term capitalism in its modern sense is attributed to Louis Blanc in 1850. And what I call capitalism, or what you call capitalism, that is to say, the appropriation of capital by some to the exclusion of others. And Pierre Joseph Proudhon in 1861, in Economic and Social Regime in which capital, the source of income, does not generally belong to those who make it work through their labor.
Right.
Karl Marx frequently referred to the capital and to the capitalist mode of production in Das Kapital in 1867. Marx did, however, not use the form capitalism, but instead used capital, capitalist, and capitalist mode of production, which appear frequently. Right, yeah. So, like, he didn't even actually call it capitalism.
Right. People are like, wait a minute. Yeah. Yeah, here's the thing. It's a word that already was there. So he used a definition that fit a thing, but that had already, as I said, 1200. I mean, but the idea is actually further than that, back to Rome, and then further than that, like I said.
Right.
So, and certainly the behavior hasn't really changed that much. You're going to even get a better opinion of that when we do this stuff on the early Mesopotamia,
Right.
the invention of states and kings.
Okay. The etymology of the term capital. So capital as an adjective in the early 13th century, of or pertaining to the head, from Old French capital, from Latin capitalis, of the head, hence capital, chief, first, from caput, genitive capitis, head, from the pi root caput, head, relating
Right, head meaning like a chief.
the head of, yeah.
Like I'm a chieftain. I'm in control of something.
Right.
I have power over. I'm a capitalist.
Right. Meaning main, principal, chief, dominant,
Right,
first in
exactly.
importance. Yeah.
Right.
The is from early 15th century in English. The modern informal sense of excellent, first rate is right. Yeah. By 1754, they used to use like that capital as a exclamation of something's good.
Yeah. Right. Capitalists do think that's good. That is a big problem I have with capitalists. They're like, oh, this society was good. Just Trump made it bad in the U.S. I'm like, oh, God, really? You think that? Trump made it worse. I agree. But at least currently.
It's not
but,
capitalism.
as far as capitalism is already bad. So,
yeah, that's right. Sorry. It's bad. Where am I? Perhaps from the earlier use of the word in reference to ships, first rate, powerful enough to be in the line of battle, attested from 1650s, fallen into disuse after 1918. So related, capitally, a capital letter, uppercase letter of larger face and differing more or less in form, is so called because it stands at the head of a sentence or a word. Interesting.
Once again, it also relates to hierarchy, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. The capital letter is the first letter, is a big one.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Capital gain is recorded from 1921. Capital goods is recorded from 1899. A capital crime or offense in the 1520s is one that involves the penalty of death and thus affects the life or head. Capital had a sense of deadly, mortal from the late 14th century in English, as it did in earlier Latin. The felt connection between head and life, mortality, also existed in Old English, as in, I'm going to mispronounce this, it's Hefodgilt, deadly sin, capital offense. Hefeds, to forfeit life. Capital punishment was in Blackstone, 1765, a classical Latin capitis poena. So capital, the noun. In the 1610s, a person's wealth, from medieval Latin capital, stock, property, noun, used of neuter of Latin capitalis, capital, chief, first. From the 1640s, the wealth employed in carrying on a particular business. Then, in a broader sense, in political economy, that part of the produce of industry which is available for further production. The term capital made its first appearance in medieval Latin as an adjective, capitalis, modifying the word pars to designate the principal sum of a money loan. The principal part of a loan was contrasted with the usury, later called interest. The payment made to the lender in addition to the return of the sum lent. This usage, known to classical Latin, had become common by the 13th century and possibly had begun as early as 1100 CE in the first chartered towns of Europe. Frank A. Fetter, Reformulation of the Concepts of Capital and Income in Economics and Accounting, 1937. And in Capital, Interest, and Rent in 1977. Also see cattle and compare sense development of fee and pecuniary. Middle English had chief money, principal fund. The noun use of the adjective in classical Latin meant a capital crime. So then we're talking about cattle. In the mid 13th century, property of any kind, including money, land, income from the Anglo-French cattle, which is only spelt with one T, catel, property. Old North French catel, or Old French chattel. From medieval Latin capital, property, stock, a noun, use of neuter of Latin adjective capitalis, principal, chief, literally from the head, from caput, compare, sense of development of fee, pecuniary. In later Middle English, especially movable property or livestock in the early 14th century, including horses, sheep, asses, etc. It began to be limited to cows and bulls from the late 16th century. So the term cattle used to apply to pretty much any property, and then it became movable property.
Right.
And now it just means cows.
Right. Which still meant wealth in a sense.
Right.
That's why I say when you think like me and you start thinking in value of things, the words don't have as much distance in their meanings. You start to see, okay, we're really all of this from the beginning, all is relatively the same.
Right.
It's being applied and then segmented off of things. But the original meaning has not really that much changed in the sense.
Right. So the etymology of the term cattle. Cattle did not originate as the term for bovine animals. I've been hanging out with my 3-year-old a little too much.
That's fine.
It was borrowed from. What's that?
That's fine because this show is for. I'm a revolutionary, not an academic, so I don't claim to do every single word right and everything.
Yeah.
My point is actually the ideas are right, or
yeah.
closer to right. That's to me what's important, and also, I'm not trying to produce these videos for academics. I'm trying to produce them for other, revolutionaries or other, thinkers.
Right. People who wanted to have the information and know the stuff, but also aren't gonna go study it for libraries for hours.
Right. I've done the studying for hours, so you don't have to.
Yeah, that's right. Where was I? Okay, so cattle did not originate as the term for bovine animals. It was borrowed from Anglo-Norman catel, itself from medieval Latin capital, principal sum of money. Capital itself derived in turn from Latin caput, meaning head. Cattle originally meant movable, personal property, especially livestock of any kind, as opposed to real property, the land, which also included wild or small free-roaming animals, such as chickens. They were sold as part of the land. That's interesting. I didn't know that. The word is a variant of chattel, a unit of personal property, and closely related to capital in the economic sense. The term replaced earlier Old English cattle, property, which survives today as fee. Okay, and there's references to to German, Dutch, and Gothic and stuff there too, which I'm sure you can see in the Damien's blog.
Yeah.
Something weird.
Exactly. What you're reading is at least half of what's in the blog.
Okay.
And you can certainly do, in a sense, click on links in the blog. There's active links, and then go and find out even more if you have so desire.
Right. If you actually want to do some of the reading.
Yeah.
Something weird happened to men 7,000 years ago, and we finally know why. Sounds like a clickbait headline. Around 7,000 years ago, all the way back to the Neolithic, something really peculiar happened to human genetic diversity. Over the next 2,000 years, and seen across Africa, Europe, and Asia, the genetic diversity of the Y chromosome collapsed, becoming as though there were only one man for every 17 women. This points to a social rather than an environmental cause, and given the social restructures between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, as humans shifted to a more agrarian cultures with patrilineal structures, relating to or based on relationship to the father or descent through the male line, this may have had something to do with it. Why do genes suggest most men died off 7,000 years ago? Modern men's genes suggest that something peculiar happened to 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. Most of the male population across Asia, Europe, and Africa seems to have died off, leaving behind just one man for every 17 women. 18 simulations showed that warfare between patrilineal clans could have caused this so-called Y chromosome bottleneck, because the members of each patrilineal clan would have a very similar Y chromosomes to each other. So, if one clan killed off another, it would also slash the chance of that family's Y chromosome moving on to offspring. People were still living in small clans, doing small-scale farming 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, a time right before people moved into larger societies and built large cities. It was a transition between early farming using stone tools and later farming in societies using metal tools.
Right, exactly the time that I say that capitalism starts. To me.
Right. No, that makes sense.
That's why I say that if you look at it, these gathering and my ownership behaviors, and then other people come in and they want what you have, they'll take it, or you are now powerful and then new people come in, you just take theirs too. And
yeah.
But also involved trade, like I said.
Right.
It's not just warfare, but warfare has always been an aspect of capitalism to me.
It's certainly part of it, right?
Yeah, it's just because it's a way to get. Because they think, hey, you know what's better than having to even say buy a slave or something is just take them. Just go and you know it's better than paying for minerals somewhere. Just take them.
Right. It's just an increase in the exploitation of the labor force,
right.
basically.
Right.
After this bottleneck, you see the start of societal organizations and the shift from small-scale societies to having cities and organizations of people into groups that are not so intent on maintaining the Y chromosome lineage. Feldman said during this time, the male population bounced back. Okay, so that's after the fighting and the whatnot. Then people moved into the bigger cities, and then
right, but at that point it was hierarchy.
Right.
At that point, that's why we're going to learn about Mesopotamia. All the cities always meant someone is the king of the city,
right?
And you're going to pay taxes to live there, or in some way that head person, that capital, leader, is getting a share of it for your supposed. It reminds me of the mafia. If you don't want to get robbed, you have to pay me, and I'll protect you from
extortion,
robbing you or other people robbing you.
yeah. That's
called statism.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I'm sorry. What were you using?
Which is, I mean, we don't have to get into it too much, but that's why anarchists say you can't separate state from capital, right?
Right.
Because extortion.
And I know you can't. So
because
well, I told you too. I never understood. At first, I just called myself an anarchist. Now I say socialist anarchist just to make a point. But not because I feel like the need to, because to me, that's what I'm saying is there is no such thing as, in a sense, a state and removed from capitalism. Capitalism and state are like symbiotic.
Right. Yeah. They're both meant for exploitation of the
right. Capitalists cannot, in a sense, survive without a state, because without a state, all of a sudden, it's going to fall into a different kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Unless you have all people doing anarchism. But I mean,
right.
A non-anarchist, warrior cults or whatever is not going to produce.
Right.
Generally, it's going to be more just slash and burn. I mean, they're going to be accumulating wealth, but it's going to be brutal.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what everybody envisions when we use the term anarchy.
Yeah.
But no. That's not what we're talking about.
No, like I said, anarchist to me is that it's the lack of the state, which to me really goes back to hierarchy. And then about capital. That's why I said I don't understand how you could be an anarchist and be a capitalist. It just
it doesn't make sense.
Like I said, I first didn't even know I needed to say socialist. Like, of course we're socialists. Aren't you an anarchist?
Yeah, that's right. How can you be an anarchist without?
So you are okay with stealing other people's labor? Calling that freedom?
Sorry, that's not how that works.
So you're okay with slavery too? I mean,
Right. Yeah, essentially. Okay, kings and the monarchy. The etymology of the term capital as it relates to kings and the monarchy in the early 13th century of or pertaining to the head from the Old French capital, from Latin capitalis of the head, and hence capital, chief, first, or from caput or head. So caput. I'm probably saying that wrong. Or head, relating to chiefdom or tribal kingship, meaning main, principal, chief, dominant, first in importance, and that is from the early 15th century in English.
Right, and why that relates to, in a sense, money, so people can understand. With it, a chief is not just like a label that you give, or a king or whatever. It's not like everybody is equal, and he just helps, keep things in order like a policeman or something.
Right. No.
Generally, he wants more land and whatever, and can divvy land and make taxes that you have to pay him because he's the big one.
Yeah, that's right.
Which I would say is the mafia. And if you don't pay him, what happens?
Yeah, exactly. A monarchy is a form of government in which a person, the monarch, is the head of the state for life or until abdication. The political legitimacy and authority of the monarch may vary from restricted and largely symbolic, which as in a constitutional monarchy, to fully autocratic, which is an absolute monarchy, and can expand across the domains of the executive, legislative, and judicial. The succession of monarchs is in most cases hereditary, often building dynastic periods. However, elective and self-proclaimed monarchies are also possible. Aristocrats, though not inherent to monarchies, often serve as the pool of persons to draw the monarch from and fill the constituting institutions. Examples, diet and court, giving many monarchies oligarchic elements. Yeah. Monarchies predate polities, like nation states and even territorial states. A nation or constitution is not necessary in a monarchy, since a person, the monarch, binds the separate territories and the political legitimacy together. Yeah. Monarchs can carry various titles such as emperor, empress, king, queen, raja, khan, czar, sultan, shah, or pharaoh. Monarchies can form federations, personal unions, and realms with vassals through personal association with the monarch, which is a common reason for monarchs carrying several titles. The word monarch, from late Latin monarchia, comes from the ancient Greek word, I'm not even going to try. It comes from the ancient Greek,
There you go.
derived from a word that means one and single, and to rule. So it's a combination of these terms. It referred to a single, at least nominally absolute ruler. A monarchy, especially absolute monarchy, is sometimes linked to religious aspects. Many monarchs once claimed the right to rule by the will of a deity, also known as the mandate of heaven or the divine right of kings. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's actually how it started, because the first, like in Mesopotamia and even Egypt, it's the king priest who's the top of the hierarchy, and then like the priests, and then then other people, and all the way at the bottom the slaves. Right. Hierarchy structure.
So they claim or a special connection to a deity, as in a sacred king, or even purported to be divine kings or incarnations of deities themselves, as in an imperial cult. Many European monarchs have been styled fidei defensor, defender of the faith. Some hold official positions relating to the state religion or established church. A similar form of societal hierarchy to monarchs is known as chiefdom or tribal kingship. It is prehistoric. Chiefdoms provided the concept of state formation, which started with civilizations such as Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt and the Indus Valley Civilization. In some parts of the world, chiefdoms became monarchies. Some of the oldest recorded and evidenced monarchies were Narmer, pharaoh of ancient Egypt in 3100 BCE or 5,122 years ago. And Enma Bargisi, a Sumerian king. I think we'll probably
learn. Oh no, yeah, we're definitely gonna, you're going to hear the right pronunciation when the other guy reads the video.
Right.
He's a little more academic than me, but I'm not claiming to be that. I'm a revolutionary.
For sure. So Enma Bargisi, a Sumerian king of Kish in 2600 BCE or 4,622 years ago. From the earliest records, monarchs could be directly hereditary, while others were elected from among eligible members. With the Egyptian, Indian, Mesopotamian, Sudanic, reconstructed Proto-Indo-European religion, and others, the monarch held sacral functions directly connected to sacrifice, and was sometimes identified with having divine ancestry, possibly establishing a notion of the divine right of kings. Basically, the idea that they were born from this line of gods, so that's why they're the king.
Right. And obviously, if I'm strong enough that me and my people took you over, we have every right to rule then.
Right. Yeah. Very much the might makes right kind of idea.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's definitely what you're going to see in Mesopotamia. They keep switching kings, and it's just one war, and take over another city. And all that city looks weak. Take them over.
Right.
Oh, but I'm your great shepherd. I'm here to take care of people. By the way, 30% tax.
Yeah, of course. Questions of how capitalism supplanted feudalism. So feudalism can be a misleading term. Really, it refers to situations of weak political centralization, parcelized sovereignty, and low population density that were uncommon historically and were arguably limited to only parts of Europe and Japan. But people often use it as a shorthand term for more or less any kind of agrarian society. Feudalism or serfdom are only two among many of the forms that past agrarian societies took, and they occupy pretty much the least appealing parts of the spectrum.
Right. So when people say that has to be the only thing and there couldn't have been nothing else, it's just wrong.
Right, eh?
Like I say,
Even the word feudalism means whatever. Like, it's so general, like such a broad...
Right. And like I said, it's not that in a general term, what that I saw that as, the dialectical Marxism says, I don't know if that's what he says, but that, it starts in tribalism and then slavery and then feudalism and then capitalism. I'm not saying that general thing if you're talking super, super general, but if you're going to go to the details, which I like to do, yeah, it starts to lose some credibility, especially if you want to see it as an all or nothing.
Right.
Like, it's because there's feudalism, there couldn't have been capitalism. Because there's slavery, there couldn't be capitalism. Because there's monarchs, it couldn't be capitalism. Like, yeah, none of that is accurate.
The Varna categories, priest, king, farmer, servant, are all outlined in a famous passage from the Rig Veda. When they divided the man into how many parts did they apportion him? What did they call his mouth, his two arms, and thighs and feet? His mouth became the Brahman. His arms were made into the Rajanya, his thighs the Vaishyas, and his feet the Shudra were born.
In other words, they're trying to explain hierarchy.
Right. So the Brahman was the priest, the Rajanya is the king or warrior, the Vaishyas were the farmers, and the Shudra were the servants.
Yep.
The Rig Veda or Rig Veda is around 1500 to 1900 BCE or older, and is an ancient Indian collection of Vedic Sanskrit hymns. It is one of the 4 sacred canonical Hindu texts, known as the Vedas. The Rig Veda is the oldest known Vedic Sanskrit text. Its early layers are among the oldest extant texts in any Indo-European language. Philological estimates tend to date the bulk of the text to the second half of the second millennium, being composed of an early Indo-Aryan language. The hymns must post-date the Indo-Iranian separation, dated to roughly 2000 BCE or 4022 years ago. When we look at how the Varna categories were actually filled in Indian society, historically there are various ambiguities. Most importantly, for my present purposes, around the Vaishya category, rather than being a category heavily populated by a mass of farmers, in fact is sparsely populated by merchant castes, with farmers mostly occupying the Shudra category. So, just to be clear, I guess, like the Vaishya was, quote unquote, supposedly the farmers, right? But it looks like,
or how people think of it today. It's
okay,
probably more accurate. Seeing farmers is the same as merchants, but merchants can be, in a sense, a level higher than a farmer.
Right, and the farmers, the workers doing the work are
there
actually...
you go. Now you're getting it. Oh, you mean capitalism?
Yeah, that's right.
Between the workers and the capitalists. Oh, now I see what you're trying to say.
There were merchants calling themselves farmers, and there was servants who were actually doing the farm work.
Now we're getting to the truth of the statement. Yeah. A lot of the farmers were working for the merchants.
Right. Yeah.
Which is what we call capitalism.
For probably less than the full value of their labor.
Right. And then, of course, like I say, and at what point is it capitalism and what point is it slavery? How much portion of your labor can be taken away and you consider it to be still capitalism and not turn to slavery?
Yeah. Yeah. Where does the line draw? Right.
Well, and that's, like I told you before, that's the kind of stuff, the value judgments I like to think about. When you say this is a thing, okay, so when does it not become that thing?
Right.
When does it actually become a different thing? Or are we just kind of using the word and limiting it when it doesn't really deserve to be so limited, or maybe it needs to be more limited? I really think about the value we're giving to things. I'm an axiologist. That's pretty much all I do.
Right.
Think about the value of things and the justification for those values, and then what makes something different. And that's why, in a sense, a lot of people will say, oh, you can't judge what truth is or good. And I'm like, well, truth and good are value judgments. So we really need to have a justification for the term and the use of that word and where it applies and does not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just a meaningless thing, right? Like,
right, because Christians will say, well, I have the truth and you have the science has the truth and we all have truths. I'm like, no, you have fucking lies. Truth means something, and you don't have it.
Yeah, that's right.
I think, okay, great. What's the justification for that? Well, this book written, by goat herders. Okay, how did they know something? Well, they didn't. They said they had divine inspiration. Oh, fuck me.
So I can just say that I've got divine inspiration. You'll believe whatever I say.
Yeah. And how do we know they weren't just insane or have some mental or just trying to cheat people? People are cons, right?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. An agrarian society or agricultural society is any community whose economy is based on producing and maintaining crops and farmland. Another way to define an agrarian society is by seeing how much of a nation's total production is in agriculture. In an agrarian society, cultivating the land is the primary source of wealth. Such a society may acknowledge other means of livelihood and work habits, but stresses the importance of agriculture and farming. Agrarian societies have existed in various parts of the world as far back as 10,000 years ago and continue to exist today. They have been the most common form of socioeconomic organization for most of recorded history. Agrarian societies were preceded by hunters and gatherers and horticultural societies and transitioned into industrial society. The transition to agriculture, called the Neolithic Revolution, has taken place independently multiple times. Horticulture and agriculture.
I totally don't agree with that statement, actually.
Oh, okay.
I don't think.
Oh, independent, right?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Well, I
Things
think
were
a lot
too
of people
connected.
like to say that because there's the distances are so far, but I don't think that's actually accurate because they're not understanding the massive movements of people. So I'm not saying that every single time had to be something, but most of every single time is something connected. It is transfer. In other words,
something going.
Yeah. Just like pottery. People tried to say, oh, pottery is all, people just kept inventing pottery. No. It starts in southern China, goes up to Siberia. From there, it moves both to the Americas and to Europe, and then drops to the Middle East. So
it wasn't just like a bunch of different people all over the world created pottery.
No. And with it came these new thinkings. Like I said, warrior cult, it's also more ideas of patrilineal, that the men than just more equalitarian society. Like I said, it makes that only certain people have this, only certain people, it changes everything. Just like you see, like when you have hunter and gatherers and you give them, a few things that only a few people have, and all of a sudden everybody wants it, and then it's that supply and demand thing that, and it's not shared equally. In other words, like some of the Amish people have a phone or something that like a whole area or a couple families can use. It's not like one person owns the phone.
Right. Horticulture and agriculture as types of subsistence developed among humans somewhere between 10,000 and 8,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent region of the Middle East. The reasons for the development of agriculture are debated, but it may have included climate change and the accumulation of food surplus for competitive gift giving. Most certainly, there was a gradual transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural economies after a lengthy period, when some crops were deliberately planted and other foods were gathered from the wild. In addition to the emergence of the farming in the Fertile Crescent, agriculture appeared by at least 6,800 BCE, or 8,822 years ago in East Asia, rice, and later in Central and South America with maize and squash. Small-scale agriculture also likely arose independently in early Neolithic contexts in India with rice and South Asia with taro. However, full dependency on domestic crops and animals, when wild resources contributed a nutritionally insignificant component to the diet, did not occur until the Bronze Age. So now we're on to feudalism and capitalism in Latin America. Debate on the left in the last decade over the origins and present nature of Latin American societies has focused on the problem of whether they should be seen as feudal or capitalist in character. A complex and lengthy discussion has taken place whose importance is not diminished by the conceptual confusion which has often accompanied it. Its significance, moreover, has not been confined to theory, since different theories have led to different political conclusions. Those who maintain that the Latin American societies were historically constituted as feudal in character and have remained so ever since, wish to emphasize that they are closed, traditional, resistant to change, and unintegrated into the market economy. If this is the case, then even these societies have still not yet reached a capitalist stage, and are, indeed, on the eve of a bourgeois democratic revolution, which will stimulate capitalist development and break this feudal stagnation. Socialists should therefore seek an alliance with the national bourgeoisie and form a united front with it against the oligarchy and imperialism. The advocates of the opposite thesis claim that Latin America has been capitalist from its inception, since it was already fully incorporated into the world market in the colonial period. The present backwardness of Latin American societies is precisely the outcome of the dependent character of this incorporation, and they are in consequence fully capitalist. It is therefore meaningless to postulate a future stage of capitalist development. It is, on the contrary, necessary to fight directly for socialism, in opposition to a bourgeoisie that is completely integrated with imperialism, forming a common front against the masses. A clarification of the basic terms of the polemic, for despite their contradictory appearance, both the positions first cited coincide in one fundamental respect. Both designate by capitalism or feudalism phenomena in the sphere of commodity exchange and not in the sphere of production, thus transforming the presence or absence of a link with the market into the decisive criterion for distinguishing between the two forms of society.
Right, and I'm not saying that those aren't my words; those are other people's words. I'm just trying. The reason I do that a lot in my blogs too. I don't talk a lot because I talk my own opinion, but everyone questions my opinion.
Right.
So I show other people's opinion to show that, okay, I'm not the only one that's thinking that. What? Because
right.
They realize that when you limit something, you say this is only this and that can't be this. Well, then you have to look at something. If that's true, you have to view it differently. That means you need to behave differently with it. But we obviously don't do that. So that's where it comes into contact with Damien's value going, wait a minute, I'm hearing an internal or an external contradiction.
Right.
Either this can't be so. Either your conception is wrong or the reality is wrong in some way being presented.
Yeah. It's interesting. So such a conception is clearly alien to Marxist theory, which maintains that feudalism and capitalism are, above all, modes of production. Andrew Gunder Frank is one of the best known defenders of the thesis that Latin America is and always has been capitalist. Frank's theoretical perspective can be summed up in the following theses. 1. It is false to suppose that economic development occurs through the same succession of stages in each country, or that the underdeveloped nations today are at a stage which has been long surpassed by the developed countries. On the contrary, today's developed capitalist countries were never underdeveloped in this way, although there was a time when they were undeveloped. 2. It is incorrect to consider contemporary underdevelopment as a simple reflection of the economic, political, cultural, and social structures of the underdeveloped country itself. On the contrary, underdevelopment is in large part the historical product of relations between the underdeveloped satellite and the present developed countries. These relations were, moreover, an essential part of the structure and evolution of the capitalist system on a world scale. That seems just obviously true.
Right, but it's important to think about it. Instead of just arguing, that's why instead of arguing over the term what's capitalism, what's not, really start to think about it and then start to apply. Okay, if that thinking is true, it should, because they're saying it in the sense how it's being presented to me, saying I'm wrong. You're saying that I have to be wrong because the evidence is true in your favor.
Right.
But if the evidence is questionable in your favor and is semi-supportive of me, well, then I'm not totally wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. 3. The conventional dualist interpretation of Latin American societies must be rejected. The dualist analysis maintains that underdeveloped societies have a dual structure, each one of whose sectors has a dynamic of its own, largely independent of the other. It concludes that the sector which is under the sway of the capitalist world has become modern and relatively developed, while the other sector is confined to an isolated feudal or pre-capitalist subsistence economy. The dual structure is wholly illusory, since the expansion of the capitalist system during the last centuries has effectively and completely penetrated even the most apparently isolated sectors of the underdeveloped world. 4. Metropolitan satellite relations are not limited to the imperial or international level, since they penetrate and structure economic, social, and political life in the dependent Latin American countries, creating sub-metropoles within them, to which the interior regions are satellites. I think I might like to read this Andrew Gunder Frank.
Good.
Seems to...
I hope that my videos in general don't make you stop at the video. I mean,
right.
Just because I don't personally want to do tons of more research doesn't mean you shouldn't. In fact, I hope people do take my ideas and think about them and then go do more research and then clarify maybe even more.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so now we're on to the corporate power of the British monarchy, capitalism, wealth, and power in the contemporary Britain. So there's an abstract. This must have been from a research paper of some.
Right.
So the abstract says, while sociology has renewed its interest in the elites, the quote unquote the elites, the British monarchy is often positioned as an archaic institution, an anachronism in relation to the corporate forms of wealth and power, and therefore irrelevant. This article refers to this framing by revealing the mechanics, technologies, and actors behind the scenes in order to expose and demystify the relationship between the symbolic and political economic functions of the monarchy. To do this, I reconceptualize the monarchy as a corporation, quote unquote, the firm, oriented towards and historically entrenched in processes of capital accumulation, profit extraction, and other forms of exploitation. The article maps out the firm's labor relations, financial arrangements, inter and national relationships, and networks, and the legal status of the crown and its components in order to demonstrate how old and new forms of wealth intersect and converge in contemporary Britain. This is something that we have in Canada. We have what we call crown land or crown properties, and it's commonly understood that just means that the government or the state is the capitalist in this case, right?
Right, and that goes to what I'm saying is that when I say there's kings start or whatever, the thought that somehow that can't in any way zero involve a capitalist or petty bourgeois, small capitalist, is just wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
To me, at least.
So there's another abstract for another paper. It looks like the bourgeois crown, capitalist, and monarchy in Thailand, 1946 to 2016. So the abstract states, in the age of capitalism, monarchy has been treated as if it were an irrelevant institution. Once capitalism becomes the dominant mode of production in a state, it is argued monarchy must either be either abolished or transformed into a constitutional monarchy, a ceremonial institution that plays no significant role in a capitalist state that is ruled by the bourgeoisie. The monarchy of Thailand, however, fits neither of those two narratives, as it enjoys hegemonic status in the capitalist state, preeminent status in the market, and popular support from the urban bourgeoisie. The Thai monarchy has been transformed into a bourgeois monarchy, a novel form of monarchy that is deeply embedded in the capitalist state, the market economy, and the bourgeois ideology.
Right, and I'm giving these articles because I'm trying to show that the separation that is being told to me by Marxists or whatever, that it can't be capitalism because there was kings then. Or
right. This is evidence to the contrary.
Right. I'm offering. So in other words, people can go look in this blog. There's another link to the linear band pottery culture specific that explains more about them to understand the why they belong in this.
Right. Okay.
But this is more my arguments or my evidence, or like to help, maybe not evidence, to aid in the thinking that probably this limited conception of capitalism is just not accurate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Here's justification for broadening your version or idea of capitalism.
Which is real important, maybe not for people don't have to do this, I guess, but because right now we're in capitalism, so it doesn't matter, where it started. I mean, the argument could be kind of like, yeah, but I think it's important for anarchists more than socialists, because an anarchist says, yeah, but now that I realize it relates to kings and the state and elite and hierarchies, that hierarchies support all this, that capitalism in a sense, inspired or was because of all of this hierarchy and elite. It's totally connected. That shit has got to go. In other words, even if we get rid of the state, it's why I'd say I don't want no one ever to worship me, or I don't worship anybody, not any thinker. Except my wife, no. But,
that's fair.
But that's a personal reason, not a ideological one, right? So an ideological realism is what I'm talking about. That's why I say I don't use the term comrade, not because I think there's anything wrong with it, not because I don't use the term family. I don't call people family generally, almost ever. I've said to you just because I say how we're working together. That's why it's once again personal, not ideological.
Right.
So I don't like that when people go, oh, we're family, or atheists are family, or socialists are family. And I'm like, I get what you want it to mean, but to me, I just hear another us and not them.
Right.
So that's why I say I'm a friend to the world. That doesn't mean I don't block a lot of conservatives, but I do.
Because sometimes you have to.
But that's a personal thing, once again, not an ideological one.
Yeah,
I want them to be educated so they can start thinking different. Because I believe a lot of times it's just propaganda. It's not that these people are bad people. Not all of them. Some of them are bad, but not all of them. And even when some of the ones that are bad, I think like with me, I did way bad things.
Right.
And it was actually people starting to care about me and show me undue kindness and then reason with me. And I started going, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, like I try to be empathetic even with people I think are bad people, because that came from somewhere. They weren't just bad and out of nothing.
Right. Well, and even if they were, we can still help people be better.
Yeah.
I had this one guy that was a total racist and stuff. I had to have him as a student when I was truck driving. And I was able to talk to him and reason with him why it didn't make sense. And he then later saw me. He goes, you know what? There was this black guy, and I didn't even get mad. I mean, it still sounded like shit.
still sounded pretty racist.
But he was two things. I realized he was starting to realize that his past behavior was not okay. That he needed to try to be different. It was just, that's a start.
Yeah.
And the other one is that he wanted my approval, someone who does not like racists at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a good behavior too, to want to, because I think that, like I told you before, shame is a great motivator. It's
right.
It makes you powerless, but it also makes you think. When you're angry, it's easier to not think. You're just focused on only your own thinking.
Yeah, you're just reacting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where, if you feel shame and it gives you pause. Then,
right. And then you're like, whoa, you're trying to figure out, how do I get it? Now you're thinking. That's the whole point.
Right. Well, I suppose continuing on, chiefdom. A chiefdom is a form of hierarchical political organization in non-industrial societies, usually based on kinship, and in which formal leadership is monopolized by the legitimate senior members of select families or houses. These elites form a political ideological aristocracy relative to the general group. In anthropological theory, one model of human social development rooted in ideas of cultural evolution describes a chiefdom as a form of social organization more complex than a tribe or a band society, and less complex than a state or a civilization. Within general theories of cultural evolution, chiefdoms are characterized by permanent and institutionalized forms of political leadership. The chief, centralized decision-making, economic interdependence, and social hierarchy. Chiefdoms are described as intermediate between tribes and states in the progressive scheme of socio-political development formulated by Elman Service. Band, tribe, chiefdom, state. A chief's status is based on kinship, so it is inherited or ascribed, in contrast to the achieved status of big man leaders of tribes. Another feature of chiefdoms is therefore pervasive social inequality. They are ranked societies according to the scheme of progressive socio-political development formulated by Morton Freed in Egalitarian Ranked Stratified State. In archaeological theory, Service's definition of chiefdoms as redistribution societies with a permanent central agency of coordination has been mostly influential. Many archaeologists, however, dispute Service's reliance upon redistribution as central to chiefdom societies and point to differences in the basis of finance, or staple finance versus wealth finance. Service argued that chief rose to assume a managerial status to redistribute agricultural surplus to ecologically specialized communities within his territory, which is staple finance. Yet in restudying the Hawaiian chiefdoms used as his case study, Timothy Earle observed that communities were rather self-sufficient. What the chief redistributed was not staple goods, but prestige goods to his followers that helped him to maintain his authority, which is wealth finance.
Once again, just showing that the people's opinion about what these terms are,
right? Yeah,
are often too simplistic.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's just funny because people will say to me a simplistic term like what capitalism means, but then they'll demand that I have some humongous detailed description of what I say, and then they'll say, "Well, it still, doesn't."
Yeah, that seems pretty typical of like any like kind of ideas that don't fit what people want to believe. I can accept the society as it is with all its problems, but when you want to propose a progressive change to society, you have to have every single problem figured out, or else we can't do it at all.
Right, and that's another thing too. People ask me, they'll go, "Well, have you solved every single problem with your new anarchist society?" I'm like, "Fuck no." But
I don't even know all the problems they'll come up with.
No, which is why I agree with, to me, a direct democracy. That once again, to me, because I consider it to be anarchism. If all else fails, go to everybody and get people's opinion. Right. Yeah. But I also think that there's certain things that even in that situation in my personal opinion, we shouldn't be voting on human rights.
Right. Yeah.
I don't care if the whole society thinks that abortion is wrong. Yeah. Is that your body? No. Okay, done.
Yeah. Yeah. Bodily autonomy kind of trumps all that other bullshit.
Right. And that's what I mean generally when I say we own ourselves or we have self, in a sense, sovereignty.
Yeah.
I'm not meaning it in some capitalist way.
Right.
Like we can still sell our bodies in parts or something. I'm talking
Well, I suppose if you want to do that, that's up to you.
Yeah. It's not my statement, but I don't support an economy that would want to do that to people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for sure. Some scholars contest the utility of the chiefdom model for archaeological inquiry. The most forceful critique comes from Timothy Paquat. I don't know if I said that right. Whose Chiefdom and Other Archaeological Delusions outlines how chiefdoms fail to account for the high variability of the archaeological evidence for middle-range societies. Paquetat argues that the evolutionary underpinnings of the chiefdom model are weighed down by racist and outdated theoretical baggage that can be traced back to Lewis Morgan's 19th century cultural evolution. From this perspective, pre-state societies are treated as underdeveloped, the savage and barbaric phases that preceded civilization. Paquetat argues that the chiefdom type is a limiting category that should be abandoned and takes as his main case study Cahokia, a central place for the Mississippian culture of North America. Chiefdoms are characterized by the centralization of authority and pervasive inequality. At least two inherited social classes, elite and commoner, are present. The ancient Hawaiian chiefdoms had as many as 4 social classes. An individual might change social class during a lifetime by extraordinary behavior. A single lineage/family of the elite class becomes the ruling elite of the chiefdom, with the greatest influence, power, and prestige, kinship, is typically an organizing principle, while marriage, age, and sex can affect one's social status and role. Anthropologists and archaeologists have demonstrated through research that chiefdoms are a relatively unstable form of social organization. They are prone to cycles of collapse and renewal, nothing capitalism has ever done.
Right.
In which tribal units band together and expand in power, fragment through some form of social stress, and band together again. An example of this kind of social organization were the Germanic peoples, who conquered the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE. Although commonly referred to as tribes, anthropologists classified their chief society as chiefdoms. They had a complex social hierarchy consisting of kings, a warrior aristocracy, common freemen, serfs, and slaves. Yeah. So we've got another abstract for a paper, The Archaeology of Chiefdoms. So the abstract says, developed as a cross-culturally comparative concept within early to mid-20th century cultural revolutionary anthropology and process archaeology, chiefdoms are defined as small-scale complex societies that are sometimes intermediate to state development, with centralized decision-making, hierarchies, some degree of hereditary social ranking, and economic centralization. In historically and ethnographically known chiefdoms, chiefs generally construct and maintain political power bases through various economic means, such as tribute, collection, control over production and exchange, foreign trade monopolies. They also use ideological means, such as ritual, myth, sacred landscapes, and military coercion. Archaeologists have recognized that these power strategies are materialized archaeologically in a variety of highly visible ways, such as monumental construction, settlement hierarchies, specialized prestige goods, production and exchange, differential household wealth, and indicators of large-scale militarism. And a significant amount of archaeological research has been carried out on the origins, evolution, and organization of chiefdoms in pre-modern societies of the Near East, Africa, East Asia, Europe, Mesoamerica, South America, North America, and Oceania. However, there is considerable recent debate about the utility of chiefdoms as a cross-culturally applicable evolutionary concept. With challenges to this archetype ranging from decoupling elements of chiefdom structure, examining these societies at more diverse scale of analysis, and rejecting the chiefdom model in favor of a variety of post-processual approaches in archaeology. The evolution of the polity, particularly the transition of chiefdoms to states, has been the subject of considerable debate. Researchers contend that chiefdoms do not simply become states as a result of increases in the size of component parts. Instead, punctuated equilibrium stemming from responses to selection pressures from social forces has more empirical support than gradualism in explaining state formation.
In other words, might makes right. Let's make it simpler.
Right.
Right. So generally, why states happen is because they're able to have the power, probably militarily. Could be religious, though, that or some other, like they said, ritual. The Pope, in a sense, is a state or whatever.
Right. He's the head of the
Right. So but it still goes back to generally that gets people that are military to follow you. And thus, they're still kind of the same. It's still pretty much military. That's why I say that, my country is a concept that has been brought to you by war.
Right.
There's no such thing as it's a state, and it hasn't involved war to make the borders of that state. And often, if you look at the history of borders, you'll see, holy shit, they change a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So this rigid line that you have between Mexico and America or Canada and America, this is nonsense.
Totally.
And it's only upheld through brutal violence.
Right. America and Canada fought. America and Mexico, fought. I mean,
now it seems like the violence is often more done to the poor or people who are suffering already, rather than the other state.
Well, but it also then we go and help states keep borders, which were fake to begin with.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Even like Ukraine and Russia. I mean, at one time there was no Russia.
Right.
Russia,
right.
And the people that turned into Russians started in Ukraine, probably. So it But then again, those people started from Siberia, and so yeah. What do you mean about borders?
Borders, yeah. What a silly idea.
Well, especially as anarchists, I know we appreciate that the utter fucking nonsense of things called borders. Plus, to me, borders actually, it's like a form of tribalism. It teaches this political tribalism. Like I said, when I went down and helped people in Mexico at an orphanage, feeding children and stuff, and spending time with them because they don't have people to be with. And my friends are telling me, why did you go down there? That's
right.
Like,
yeah,
what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah. It's like on the news, if a plane crash happens, they always say there were 3 Canadians on the plane that died. Right. Well, I don't give a shit. Like
150 people died, but 3 Canadians. You're oh my God, 3 Canadians.
Those people weren't more important than the other people.
Right. Right. And so people always wonder why anarchists don't like borders. Like, how can you have no borders? I'm like, I don't know how you can support borders.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, chiefdom or state. The debate of the evolution of the political institution undergirds the various models attempting to explain if, how, and why chiefdoms transitioned into large-scale agrarian states. By chiefdoms, we mean any socio-political entity in which overall social control activities are vested in a subsystem which is externalized, specialized vis-a-vis other activities, but not internally specialized in terms of different aspects of the control process. Example, observing, deciding, or coercing. Conversely, states are political entities that are internally specialized with regard to function and have a monopoly over the legitimate means of violence. Whilst internal specialization is an important defining characteristic, it is the state's ability to legitimately monopolize force that most clearly separates it from chiefdoms and other political forms. Thus, while chiefdoms can and have become internally differentiated at high levels, revealing hierarchical levels of jurisdiction and the creation of sub-elites whose kinship ties likely cross-cut local modes of integration, there are no known examples of chiefdoms in which the chief and his lieutenants have a true monopoly over physical force. In a state, the king and or set of administrators can and do derive power from their ability and legitimate right to use force as a last resort. Chiefs are given legitimate authority, typically through traditional means, that can be withdrawn relatively easily by the tribe, whereas states rely on more complex systems of legitimacy, such as theocracy or legal rational. The lack of monopolized means of violence and the emergence of differentiated nodes of power make chiefdoms unstable political forms, as the possibility of breakdown is salient, where internal struggles cannot be met with force or the threat of force. The polity is then subject to problems caused by various internal and external factors, leading chiefdoms to cycle between simple 2 rank levels and complex forms 3 or more rank levels. To be sure, the state does have problems of stability of greater magnitude, yet they are also more successful at facilitating peaceful exchanges for longer periods of time because of their ability to use force to coerce internally differentiated social units, as well as their control over what has been referred to as symbolic power and violence. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I like it almost seems in this that it's
written by a statist.
Yeah, written by somebody who's okay with the monopolization.
Well, of course
of
it is.
by the
It's not.
state.
It's written by a person who's a statist. It's written by a person. Well, that's the important thing of why all these terms, we have to assess how much of our bias are we applying it. And I have to do this too. I mean, I'm an anarchist, so my thinking is.
So when I read something like that, and I'm going, well, I don't know, you sound like you're justifying this, man, and I.
No, I'm not. No,
whoever.
Again,
yeah.
Like I said, I presented the stuff just as it is, not trying to, because if I started doing that, then couldn't you say that I'm trying to lead to my thinking?
Right.
Yeah. So anyways, like I said, this stuff is not like direct evidence, in a sense. It's a semi-direct, because what it's doing is showing that this fixed, what people say to me, it can't be what Damien says.
Mm-hmm.
This says, but this kind of evidence shows that, well, you may not even know what you're talking about.
Right.
In the sense that, to the point of what I mean is that you can't say that I am wrong and you are 100% sure of that, and the facts are all on your side, is what I mean. That's just not the case, especially the more you look into it and you require details instead of some just generalized, application that is missing all the pieces.
Right.
Claims are easy. Proof is hard.
Proof is hard. Yeah, for sure. Okay. It is worth pointing out that much of the literature we will rely on this anthropological or is anthropological or archaeological in nature. It will be apparent below that some sociologists, such as Karl Marx, 1845-46, and his theory of primitive accumulation, will provide some important mechanisms with which to explain punctuated evolutionary change. However, sociologists have been generally concerned with the formation of the nation-state in the 17th century in Europe, which is an entirely different organizational unit than the early city-states in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, the Indus Valley, Mesoamerica, and Peru. Both types of political change are important, but we feel the transition from chiefdoms to states has been relatively and recently neglected in sociology as a general interest in long-term social change, both problems with which the classical theorists were fascinated. In a study of state formation in Mesopotamia, some take the long view of human socio-cultural evolution, that is, 80,000 years old or so, arguing state formation that took place from around 6,000 to 3,000 BCE, or 8,022 to 5,022 years ago, and was a single punctuated event, a dynamic interval of human cultural evolution. What many today would deem a slow process has been recognized as being quite rapid in the face of the entire course of human evolution. Yeah.
Right. Just like going back to why I had you read a thing about the 7,000-year-old drop.
Right.
This was not evolution. This was social planning.
Right.
So this is intentional.
Evolution happens over millennia,
or if you think about it, evolution happens naturally. This is artificial,
right?
In a sense, evolution of society. The society was moving along relatively, evolutionary in a more natural way, and then all of a sudden, 7,000 years ago, it stopped.
Yeah.
And it stopped not in one area. This is why I try to say it's not one area. This one area didn't just limit its ideas to here. It then immediately spread out, and then they spread out, and then they spread out, and they spread out. And all of a sudden, like it says, Africa, Asia, Europe. I mean, all these areas almost experienced this, rapid thing at the same time.
Right.
And then right after that, then states happened. And you're like,
Something, yeah, that's interesting. What a coincidence. Taking a larger, though complementary view, it has been argued that between 7,500 to 1,500 BCE, or 9,522 years ago, or so, the Near East went from a disconnected region of simple and isolated societies, pre-pottery Neolithic period, to a network of chiefdoms, to a highly interconnected and interdependent network of politically complex polities at stately and imperial levels. Another contends that this same punctuated evolutionary sequence, simple societies to chiefdoms to local and regional world system, occurred not only in the West Asian region, but also in the Mesoamerican, Andean, and East Asian world systems. Taking a slightly different appraisal of the archaeological evidence analyzed has provided an argument that it is plausible to suggest that pristine chiefdoms occur gradually as resource control, alliance, and exchange networks and supporting ideologies emerge slowly, and sometimes risk management strategies generate legitimate authority for the best practitioners. Secondary chiefdoms whose size and scale were qualitatively different formed rather quickly in reaction to real or perceived threats from neighboring chiefdoms or other societies, while the rate of evolution was aided by secondary chiefdoms borrowing a tremendous amount of cultural material from their neighbors. It would be incorrect to conflate the quantitative growth of pristine polities with that of secondary ones. This evolutionary pattern appears to bear out, for example, in Mesoamerica. Archaeological evidence indicates that pristine chiefdoms evolved during the middle formative period, 1500 to 600 BCE, or 3522 to 2622 years ago, on the South Gulf Coast region and not in central Mexico, despite similar material conditions. So a potential conclusion is put forth that the evolution of secondary chiefdoms in the highlands was indeed a rapid process that was likely stimulated by the development of other chiefdoms on the Gulf Coast. It's a king or priest. So definition of a priest king, sacerdotal ruler, one who rules as king by right of his priestly office, functioning as a vice regent of a deity. The Uruk period, 4000 to 3100 BCE, or 6022 to 5122 years ago, also known as the Proto-Literate period, existed from the Proto-Historic Chalcolithic, early Bronze Age period.
Chalcolithic is the Copper Age.
Yeah.
Just so you know, they don't call it that, or they call it sometimes the Neolithic. They should just call it the Copper Age, because call it everything a Bronze Age. Why not make it simple? But archaeology has no desire to make it simple, obviously.
Obviously. In the history of Mesopotamia, after the Ubaid period and before the Jmet Nasr period, named after the Sumerian city of Uruk. This period saw the emergence of urban life in Mesopotamia and the Sumerian civilization. The late Uruk period, 34th to 32nd centuries, saw the gradual emergence of the cuneiform script and corresponds to the early Bronze Age. It has also been described as the Proto-Literate period. It was during this period that pottery painting declined as copper started to become popular, along with cylinder seals.
Right, cylinder seals, I know people understand they can be to transfer ideas. They also, when they say seals, what they mean can be storehouses of grain. So somebody is taking all the grain, or a majority of it, and then stockpiling it, and they put a label on it, and then of clay to in a sense bind the rope that holds the door, and then they roll this seal on it and make some imprints of gods or whatever to protect the door. In a sense, the seal. So if you break the seal, they know you've gotten to the grain. So I'm just saying it relates to capital.
Right.
Or often. I'm not saying it only did, but those seals were absolutely. Some of the first seals are real simple, and I think still the same thing. I think that they were often to the accumulation of wealth.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because if you can't, it's a storage thing again, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. How are you going to lock it? And then how do you know someone just didn't open the lock and put a new lock or whatever? Well, you do that by a seal that you have and nobody else does.
Yeah. From the middle of the fourth millennium, it transitions to the best known period, late Uruk, which continues until around 3200 or 3100 BCE or 5222 to 5122 years ago. It is in fact in this period that the features which are generally seen as most characteristics of the civilization of the Uruk period occur. High technological development, the development of most urban agglomerations with imposing monumental structures. The most characteristic of these is level 4 of Yana, the appearance of state institutions, and the expansion of the Uruk civilization throughout the whole Near East. In his book,
as capitalists, the best thing about it is once you get some power, you need some more. It's like billionaires today. Billions not enough. You need 2 billion, multiple billions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Infinite growth.
Yeah.
You got to get more.
It's never enough. That's why I said before, to me, billionaireism, in a sense, is like a mental problem. Because if I gave any other rational person $1 billion, they would just stop everything and live the rest of their life enjoying themselves.
Right.
Probably. Or sharing with their friends and family or whatever. But I mean, your first thought, if you get $1 billion, is, wow, I can make more money.
Yeah, you talk to any single working person who says, if I win the lottery, I would do X.
Right. Yeah, it's not make more money.
Yeah, it's never make more money. It's always, I'm going to do my hobby. I'm going to do my passion. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to relax.
Right.
But yeah, definitely something wrong with those people that need to grow more. In his book, 2 Cheers for Anarchism, 6 Easy Pieces on Autonomy, Dignity, and Meaningful Work and Play, is a 2012 book-length defense of the anarchist perspective written by anthropologist James C. Scott and published by Princeton University Press. James C. Scott dedicates an entire chapter to describing some features of the petite bourgeoisie. First, he points out the contempt of this class by Marxists due to the ambiguity of their political position. He further points out that this position of contempt or distaste encompasses both the socialist bloc and the large capitalist democracies, due to the difficulty of monitoring, taxing, and policing this class. This difficulty results from the complexity, variety, and mobility of activities taken on by this class. He points out that the petite bourgeoisie has existed for most of civilized society. The law in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamians had the first written codified laws which reveal the level of social, political, economical, and legal development of the Mesopotamian civilization. The oldest example of the legal code is attributed to Urukagna, who ruled the Sumerian city-state of Lagash in the 24th century BCE, or 4,422 years ago, although the actual text has never been discovered. The Code of Ur-Nama, created by Ur-Nama of Ur, 21st century BCE, or around 4,122 years ago, is the oldest known code of law, which is only partially preserved. The laws were inscribed on a clay tablet in Sumerian language and arranged in casuistic form in a pattern in which a crime is followed by the punishment, which is also the basis of nearly all latter codes of law, including the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Ur-Nammu is also notable for instituting monetary compensations for inflicting bodily injuries, which are considered to be the oldest known code of law.
Right, it's all about money.
Right. Yeah.
So let's see. Who would that favor? Would that favor the underclass with almost no capital at all, or would that favor the capitalist class with all the money? In other words, kind of like now, we can buy better lawyers and get off. And
Yeah, well, that's like they say, if the punishment for a crime is a fine, then it's basically legal for the rich, right?
Right. And that's what I'm saying. To understand is that some of the first laws was all about capitalism. And think about this. Who gets the money? Is it just thrown out in the air to the whole population? Hell no. It's the thief. It's the king.
It doesn't go to the person that was harmed. It goes to the state.
Well, sometimes it could go in a sense to the person harmed, but I guarantee, once again, taxes and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, but yes, a lot of it is going to go just to the king or the state or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. In contrary to Code of Unamu, the Code of Hammurabi from the 18th century BCE was based on the principle an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Lex talionis. One of the most famous ancient codes contains 282 judgments of civil and criminal law. The penalties vary from crime to crime, as well as on the social status of the offender, although given slaves had some rights.
And that would depend on time and place and culture also, that there's other ones that's happened. Because certainly even in the American South, some people treated their slaves better than others. That's no argument for slavery.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Just like capitalism. Some capitalists treat their employees better than other capitalists.
Yeah.
It's still fucking fuck capitalism.
If you have a good boss, that doesn't make capitalism good.
No, fuck no.
Yeah. The Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi is a Babylonian legal text composed in 1755 to 1750 BCE, or 3777 to 3772 years ago. It is the longest, best organized, and best preserved legal text from the ancient Near East. It is written in the Old Babylonian dialect of Akkadian, purportedly by Hammurabi, sixth king of the first dynasty of Babylon. The primary copy of the text is inscribed on a basalt or diorite stele, which is 2.25 meters tall, or 7 feet 4.5 inches.
Right, of stone. It looks like or some of them I've seen. I don't know particularly that one, but I think so. It looks like a finger, like they got the finger of God.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
The stele was rediscovered in 1901 at the site of Susa in present-day Iran, where it had been taken as plunder 600 years after its creation. The text itself was copied and studied by Mesopotamian scribes for over a millennium. So then we've got some different offenses, different laws under the Code of Hammurabi, I think.
Obviously not all 200.
Nope. Property offenses. Stealing and receiving stolen property, kidnapping, harboring fugitive slaves, breaking and entering, burglary, looting, and burning houses, such as if a man breaks into a house, they shall kill him and hang him in front of that very breach. Interesting. Seems a little harsh, but... Land and houses. Tenure of fiefs, duties of farmers, debts of farmers, irrigation offenses, cattle trespass, cutting down trees, care of date orchards, and offenses connected with houses, such as if a man has a debt lodged against him, and the storm god Adad devastates his field, or a flood sweeps away the crops, or there is no grain grown in the field due to insufficient water, in that year he will not repay grain to his creditor. He shall suspend performance of his contract, literally wet his clay tablet, and he will not give interest payments for that year.
Which you're like, wow, that almost sounds better than now.
Yeah, like, so then if I don't have income, you can't collect my fucking debts. What? That makes perfect sense to me.
You're like, these people are backwards. I mean, wait a minute.
Hold on.
Things were bad before capitalism. I don't know.
Some things made
depends on what you mean by capitalism, and especially what you mean by bad.
Yeah, that's
of course,
right.
Like you saw. I mean, the code also says if you break into a house, you get killed. So
yeah, that's right. Seems a little harsh there, but then better on. So commerce, loans and trade, innkeeping, fraud by couriers, distraint and pledge of persons for debt, and safe custody or deposit. Such as, if a merchant should give silver to a trading agent for an investment venture, and he, the trading agent, incurs a loss on his journeys, he shall return the silver to the merchant in the amount of the capital sum. Ah, that's not bad either. So if I borrow money to start a business and my business fails, I don't owe you interest. I owe just the amount that I borrowed.
But once again, doesn't this, though, even though it's, as you agree, a better ruling on capitalism,
it's still bad.
Well, true, but I was going to say, how is it not, in a sense, a capitalist system where
you're
using money and everything? So,
yeah, that's right. Absolutely. It's still
and interest and stuff is money, but without labor. So.
Right. Professional men. Surgeons, veterinary surgeons, barbers, builders, shipbuilders, and boatmen, such as, if a builder constructs a house for a man but does not make it conform to specifications, so that when a wall then buckles, that builder shall make that wall sound using his own silver. That's not bad. Although, again, you're still talking about paying people to do work.
Right.
Like, and
also, it's not that only a limited amount of people are doing it, right? Even like in the Bible, where Jesus supposedly is a carpenter to his father,
right?
So someone's still getting free labor until you learn,
right?
So or also you can have multiple buildings being built at the same time. It's not like one house was built and then everybody has to wait for this one dude or another. So,
yeah, no, that's right. Agriculture, oxen, theft of fodder by tenants, hire of agricultural laborers. What?
Wait a minute. You're like, back in Mesopotamia, there's no capitalism. Hiring of agricultural laborers, like, that sounds like some shit today.
Yeah, that sounds like hiring workers. Theft of agricultural implements, hire of herdsmen, duties of shepherds, hire of beasts and wagons, and hire of seasonal laborers. This all that's rates of hire.
It says of beasts, and so someone else owns these beasts,
and you're paying to use them. You're
paying to use their property, not even their labor, just their thing, And of course, they accumulate wealth, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure, like professional men hire, they're the people they're the contractor, right?
Right.
And they have a crew.
They do. Who they don't pay their full wage. They take money home with them. Yes, they do.
Sounds like capitalism to me.
Right, but and that's what I wanted was other people also to read the blog, not just listen to this, but even just listen to this, and just to see that. At first, people keep saying that I'm so wrong, or it's ridiculous. Like, how dare I say, that it was a long time ago? I'm like, how dare you say it can't?
Yeah, it seems like just a misunderstanding on some level. Like, they just don't have the knowledge of the background of it, I guess.
Well, and that's why I said it takes a lot of reading in this stuff, because until you read it, did you feel as confident?
No. I mean, part of me knew, like, because there's always been different types of societies. Like, it wasn't called capitalism, but they behaved in the same way that they behave now, where people were being paid a wage for work and people above them profited. Like, yeah. And there were property owners and people who didn't have,
Absolutely. And people had bigger property, and people accumulated property by ownership of families.
Yeah.
Passing down, inherited wealth.
It's like you say, like, it's the behavior. Because sure, we called it after the Industrial Revolution, we call it capitalism. But it the same behavior existed beforehand.
That's right. And then also, but I also say it's good news for them. They shouldn't be fighting me so much. I'm not saying that capitalism is a good thing. No.
Right.
I'm not saying that capitalism is exploitive. Of course it is. That's what I'm trying to show is it always has been.
Yes, exactly.
The thing I think that a lot of them don't like is that it I think inspired the formation of states.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something too, like, because a lot of like right-wingers, pro-capitalists like to think that capitalism is human nature. This is the way competition is human nature. And so when you can say, well, capitalism has only lasted for 100 years or 150 years, then you can say it's new. It's definitely not human nature.
Right.
Where if you have to look at the broader picture, then you say, okay, well, 7,000 years ago, maybe that's closer to what the capitalists are saying, even though it's still not. Right?
It's still not, because you have 200,000 years of human evolution, and 7,000 is not a good example for like a human nature thing.
Yeah, no, it's still just a blip.
It's a blip. Yeah, I mean, what is the percentage? I'm not good at math, but 207.
It'd be 3.5.
Yeah, which is no percentage like that is going to make you think that it's inherent.
Yeah, that is not the rule then.
No. So I get that my thing, maybe scaring them that I'm making it too old or something. But
yeah,
if you really understand, well, society is old. Like I said, religion certainly 100,000 years, and so even 7,000 with 100,000. That's why I said it's not right to say religion gave rise to capitalism. Right. Religion was around a shit long time before that, and so.
Yeah, like I think that's probably part of it. Is like because even people who we share political ideas with are often very limited in their scope of how much history they know. Like before I started talking to you, I didn't realize I didn't really have a grasp of how long history was. like I knew it, I mean numbers, yeah, it's a long time ago, whatever. But now,
and some people think that religion is inherent, and I also show that that's not true either.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
or religion has to equal God, so that's also not true.
Right.
Animism seems to be run fine in fact still in Southern Africa, and yeah. I could almost live in an animist society, be okay with that, because they really don't force shit on you, and it's kind of anarchist, and everybody's equal. Like, that's pretty much what I'm looking for. Yeah. Not that I want to be an animist, but I'm just saying it just shows that religion can exist and not be predatory.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, I just really think that a lot of people have a very limited scope of how long human history actually has been.
Yeah. Right, so I can get that when I say 7,000, well, that's the whole time of history. I'm like, capitalism has fucked us up since the beginning of what we call history.
But there's still so much of humanity before that.
Yeah, that is not the start.
Yeah.
And as you said, too, when you said you agree that you want to live in an animist-only society, it sounds pretty wonderful when you read it. You're like, wow, that's pretty much like children have rights and women have rights and rape doesn't exist and holy shit,
There's not a lot of there's no forced worship or
there's no forced anything. You could it's like, in fact, most people that probably hung out with them would think they're non-religious at all.
Right. Because
it's more like people spiritual, not religious or something. They have magical thinking, but that doesn't really mean they do. There's not a lot that they do about it. They just go, yeah, okay, plants are magical.
Right, sure. And in a very real sense, like plants are magical, right? It's all very cool stuff, but yeah.
Well, and I'm proud of you for being open to learn. I know that some of my ideas when people first hear them can sound like I'm fucking nuts.
Yeah, I think what it takes is actually listening. That's what. Instead of just going, well, what the fuck? Now you're gonna disagree. You gotta actually listen and
right.
Yeah. Well, I guess where are we? Rates of hire. Wages of craftsmen and hire of boats. If a man rents a boat of 60 cur capacity, he will give 1/6 of a shekel of a silver per day as its hire.
Right. In other words, a minimum wage.
Right.
Right. So states have never had minimum wages.
Right. Yeah. Slaves. Warranties on the sale of slaves and purchase of slaves abroad, such as if a slave should declare to his master, "You are not my master," he, the master, shall bring charge and proof against him that he is indeed his slave, and his master shall cut off his ear. Well, that's not good.
Yeah.
So we got a couple more here. Enslavement. Oh, no, we're on to enslavement. We're all done with the Hammurabi Code. Ancient DNA reveals that wealthy families in prehistoric Germany once lived with poorer people they weren't related to, suggesting that live-in slavery or servitude started around 1300 years earlier than once thought. Archaeologists believe that inequality in the early Bronze Age, from around 2200 BCE or 4222 years ago, usually took the form of a small number of powerful elites living in communities of mostly peasants. This upper class was possibly made up of wealthy farmers or princely leaders and their families. But it is difficult to understand their social structure through archaeological objects alone. Slavery and enslavement are both the state and condition of being a slave. Excuse me again. Who is someone forbidden to quit their service for an enslaver, and who is treated by the enslaver as their property. Slavery typically involves the enslaved person being made to perform some form of work while also having their location or residence dictated by the enslaver. Many historical cases of enslavement occurred when the enslaved broke the law, became indebted, or suffered a military defeat. Other forms of slavery were instituted along demographic lines, such as race. The duration of a person's enslavement might be for life or for a fixed period of time, after which freedom would be granted. The word slave arrived in English via the Old French "sklave." I'm probably saying that wrong, but that's okay. In medieval Latin, the word was "sclavus," and in Byzantine Greek, I'm not even going to try, use of the word arose during the early medieval period, when Slavs, from Central and Eastern Europe, were frequently enslaved by Moors from the Iberian Peninsula and North Africa.
Right, so a racial name.
Mm-hmm. There is a dispute among historians about whether such terms as unfree laborer or enslaved person rather than slave should be used when describing the victims of slavery. According to those proposing a change in terminology, slave perpetuates the crime of slavery in language by reducing its victims to a non-human noun instead of carrying them forward as people, not the property that they were. Other historians prefer slave because the term is familiar and shorter, or because it accurately reflects the inhumanity of slavery, with person implying a degree of autonomy that slavery does not allow. Forced labor or unfree labor is sometimes used to describe an individual who is forced to work against their own will, under threat of violence or other punishment. But the generic term unfree labor is also used to describe chattel slavery, as well as any other situation in which a person is obliged to work against their own will, and a person's ability to work productively is under the complete control of another person. This may also include institutions not commonly classified as slavery, such as serfdom, conscription, and penal labor.
Or children.
Or
wives.
Yep. So it's not specific enough, I don't think.
Yeah.
While some unfree laborers, such as serfs, have substantive de jure legal or traditional rights, they also have no ability to terminate the arrangements under which they work and are frequently subject to forms of coercion, violence, and restrictions on their activities and movements outside of their place of work. Slavery predates written records and has existed in many cultures. Slavery is rare among hunter-gatherer populations because it requires economic surpluses and a substantial population density. Thus, it has existed among unusually resource-rich hunter-gatherers, such as the American Indian peoples of the salmon-rich rivers of the Pacific Northwest coast. Slavery became widespread only with the invention of agriculture during the Neolithic Revolution about 11,000 years ago.
Right, because someone need to hire them farmers.
Right.
But what's better than paying 5 shekels or whatever you said, 6 shekels, is just to have them work for fucking free.
For sure. Yeah. In the earliest known records, slavery is treated as an established institution. The Code of Hammurabi, 1760 BCE, for example, prescribed death for anyone who helped a slave escape or who sheltered a fugitive. The Bible mentions slavery as an established institution. Slavery was practiced in almost every ancient civilization. Such institutions included debt bondage, punishment for crime, the enslavement of prisoners of war, child abandonment, and the enslavement of slaves' offspring. Economists have modeled, we're on to slavery and economics. Economists have modeled the circumstances under which slavery and variants such as serfdom appear and disappear. One observation is that slavery becomes more desirable for landowners where land is abundant, but labor is scarce, such that rent is depressed and paid workers can demand high wages. If the opposite holds true, then it is more costly for landowners to guard the slaves than to employ paid workers who can demand only low wages because of the degree of competition. Thus, first slavery and then serfdom gradually decreased in Europe as the population grew. They were reintroduced in the Americas and in Russia as large areas of land with few inhabitants became available. The clear connection between slavery and American capitalism.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I added that because people feel like that once there's slavery, there can't be capitalism, or once there's capitalism, it's not slavery. That just absolutely is not the case.
Right. Yeah. If capitalism is extraction of wealth through the labor of others, then slavery and capitalism are hand in hand.
We certainly are related.
Yeah.
And not confrontational.
No, not even a little. Yeah. The ties between slavery and capitalism in the United States weren't always crystal clear in our history books. For a long time, historians mostly depicted slavery as a regional institution of cruelty in the South, and certainly not the driver of broader American economic prosperity. Now, 16 scholars are helping to set the record straight by exploring the true ties between 19th century economic development and a brutal system of human bondage in the 2016 book, Slavery's Capitalism, A New History of American Economic Development. Contrary to popular belief, the small farmers of New England weren't alone responsible for establishing America's economic position as capitalism expanded. Rather, the hard labor of slaves in places like Alabama, South Carolina, and Mississippi needs to be kept in view as well. In fact, more than half the nation's exports in the first 6 decades of the 19th century consisted of raw cotton, almost all of it grown by slaves, according to the book, which was edited by Sven Beckert, the Laird Bell Professor of History at Harvard University.
And one point, too, about the Northerners. It's not, too, that the Northerners were doing wage slavery. That wasn't that really dissimilar from the slaves. A few things were different, obviously, the abuse and stuff, but the absolute poverty inflicted on by the undue taking of the people's profit of labor in the North is so bad that even Frederick Douglass talked about being a free person. Now he can own himself. And then after years of living under the supposed free capitalism, said, holy shit, this isn't much better. In fact, some parts are worse.
Yeah.
And I think that's this thing that I think maybe anarchists and socialists, or Marxists have an issue is, to me, wage slavery and wage theft are way more important than the term capitalism.
Right.
Because they're talking about how actually people are being treated.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I guess right now capitalism is the big term that everybody uses, right? And then a lot of but wage theft, if you actually measure how much theft there is in North America, there's more wage theft than there is any other type of theft.
Right, wage slavery is absolutely the norm. Totally.
Yeah. It's not good. The slave economy of the southern states had ripple effects throughout the entire U.S. economy, with plenty of merchants in New York City, Boston, and elsewhere helping to organize this trade of the slave-grown agricultural commodities and enjoying plenty of the riches as a result. In the decades between the American Revolution and the Civil War, slavery as a source of the cotton that fed Rhode Island's mills, as a source of the wealth that filled New York's banks, as a source of the markets that inspired Massachusetts manufacturers, proved indispensable to national economic development. Beckert and Rockman write in the introduction to the book. Cotton offered a reason for entrepreneurs and inventors to build manufactories in such places as Lowell, Pawtucket, and Paterson, thereby connecting New England's Industrial Revolution to the advancing plantation frontier of the Deep South. And financing cotton growing, as well as marketing and transporting the crop, was a resource of great wealth for the nation's merchants and banks. Yeah, it's because of the link, the way that capitalism is linked everywhere, right? Like, you can't separate America's abundance from slavery.
No. Well, again, a lot of people think America is somehow great because of God and all. It's just absolute horseshit. It's great. It's conceived as great because it was able to steal a lot of wealth.
Right.
It did that by slavery, including, to me, wage slavery, and which is not stopped.
No, that's right. People forced to work for minimum wage or less and barely surviving.
Right. Well, and even people, let's just say that think that, oh no, I'm middle class, man. Right. And you're still only getting 30% of your labor. Right. And you feel it. And just imagine if people had that much taken in taxes. You know, people are like, oh, I hate taxes. They seem to have no problem though with wage theft and wage slavery, including like a lot of people work in America. They work as a consultant where they're removed from their benefits is really the issue. They don't want to pay extra anything for you, and then they can also only work you when they want and not work you when they want, or they work in a sense in a system where they give you a salary, and the salary is really an attempt at wage theft.
Yep. It's an attempt because it makes you work more hours without compensation.
Right, like one of the jobs my wife had worked before, they said, that they wanted her to work more than 40 hours, always.
Right. Yep.
Well, she says it's every salary job she has. But anyways, I was trying to remove it from the current one. So
I know. There's a handful of people in my industry that aren't hourly. They're salaried employees. And every single one of them is basically on call 24 hours a day.
Right.
If something happens, they have to be able to come to work and deal with it.
Right. So the point is that the reason is salary is not, oh, great, I finally got a salary job. Yes. And now they can really fuck you.
Yeah, that's right.
Or how about when I was in Oregon, right? And I'm working for a job, I think it was like $15 an hour for truck driving. Like this is like, I don't know, almost 20 years ago now, probably something. Anyways, but I drove, and then while I was driving, there was an accident. I had to sit there for like 2 hours. And then I was able to drive again. Right. That 2 hours, they paid me minimum wage. I was like, what the fuck? You were just sitting there. I go, yeah, not at home.
I wasn't like free time.
I was sitting there having to manage, the safety of the vehicle.
Yeah.
How am I not working? And they said, well, in Oregon, this is a right to work state. And so because of that, we can pay you no money. We could pay less, I'm like,
Uh-huh.
but it's to me constant wage theft.
Yeah, for sure. In order to understand the brutality of American capitalism, you have to start on the plantation. Those searching for the reasons the American economy is uniquely severe and unbridled have found answers in many places: religion, politics, or culture. But recently, historians have pointed persuasively to the natty fields of Georgia and Alabama, to the cotton houses and slave auction blocks as the birthplace of America's low road approach to capitalism. Slavery was undeniably a font of phenomenal wealth. By the eve of the Civil War, the Mississippi Valley was home to more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the United States. Cotton grown and picked by enslaved workers was the nation's most valuable export. The combined value of enslaved people exceeded that of all the railroads and factories in the nation. New Orleans boasted a denser concentration of banking capital than New York City. What made the cotton economy boom in the United States and not in all the other far-flung parts of the world with climates and soil suitable to the crop was our nation's unflinching willingness to use violence on non-white people to exert its will on seemingly endless supplies of land and labor. Given the choice between modernity and barbarism, prosperity and poverty, lawfulness and cruelty, democracy and totalitarianism, America chose all of the above. Nearly 2 average American lifetimes, 79 years, have passed, of 79 years each, have passed since the end of slavery. Only 2. It is not surprising that we can still feel the looming presence of this institution, which helped turn a poor, fledgling nation into a financial colossus. The surprising bit has to do with the many eerily specific ways slavery can still be felt in our economic life. American slavery is necessarily imprinted on the DNA of American capitalism, write the historians Sven Beckert and Seth Rockman. The task now, they argue, is cataloging the dominant and recessive traits that have been passed down to us, tracing the unsettling and often unrecognized lines of descent by which Americans' national sin is now being visited upon the third and fourth generations. So now we're on to wage slavery. Wage slavery is a term used to describe a situation where a person's livelihood depends on wages or a salary, especially when the wages are low and the person has few realistic chances of upward mobility. The term is sometimes used to criticize exploitation of labor and social stratification, with the former seen primarily as unequal bargaining power between labor and capital, particularly when workers are paid comparatively low wages, example, sweatshops, and the latter as a lack of worker self-management, fulfilling job choices, and leisure in an economy. The criticism of social stratification covers a wider range of employment choices bound by the pressures of a hierarchical society to perform otherwise unfulfilling work that deprives humans of their species' character, not only under threat of starvation or poverty, but also of social stigma and status diminution. Historically, some socialist cooperatives or socialist organizations and activists have espoused worker self-management or worker cooperatives as possible alternatives to wage labor. Similarities between wage labor and slavery were noted as early as Cicero in ancient Rome, such as De Officiis. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, thinkers such as Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and Karl Marx elaborated the comparison between wage labor and slavery, while Luddites emphasized the dehumanization brought about by machines. The introduction of wage labor in the 18th century Britain was met with resistance, giving rise to the principles of syndicalism and anarchism.
Yay for anarchy. Sorry.
Before the American Civil War, Southern defenders of African American slavery invoked the concept of wage slavery to favorably compare the conditions of their slaves to workers in the North. The United States abolished most forms of slavery after the Civil War, but labor union activists found the metaphor useful, according to historian Lawrence Glickman in The Gilded Age. References abounded in the labor press, and it is hard to find a speech by a labor leader without the phrase. the first labor strike in history. The troubles began in 1159 BCE, or 3,181 years ago, 3 years before the festival, when the monthly wages of the tomb builders and artisans of the Set Ma'at, the place of truth, better known as Deir el Medina, arrived almost a month late. The scribe Amennacht, who also seems to have served as a kind of shop steward, negotiated with local officials for the distribution of grain to the workers. But this was only a temporary solution to an immediate problem. The underlying cause of the failure in payment was never addressed. Instead of looking into what had gone wrong and trying to prevent it from happening again, officials dedicated themselves to preparation for the grand festival. The payment to the workers at Deir el Medina was again late, and then again late until, as Wilkinson writes, the system of paying the necropolis workers broke down altogether, prompting the earliest recorded strikes in history. The workers had waited for 18 days beyond their payday and refused to work any longer. They laid down their tools and marched toward the city, shouting, "We are hungry." They first demonstrated at Ramses's the thirds mortuary temple, and then staged a sit-in near the temple at Tutmos III.
You're like, damn, this shit still works today.
That's fucking awesome.
Well, and it's why I did for 15 years. I told you I did direct action.
Right.
Because it absolutely, look, it worked 3,000 years ago, and guess what? It still works.
Yeah.
And I'm totally for it. I'm just saying I'm older now. I'm just going to do more teaching and also because emotional stuff for me. But I totally support direct action. Hell yeah, sure. That's how you get shit done.
Yep.
That's why I said even though I vote, I see voting as just like a nuisance. The real thing is when you get out in the streets and you make shit happen.
Yep, for sure.
Direct action. So when people are like, you vote, you hope it's going to change. Fuck, voting doesn't change shit or almost nothing. To me, what really changes shit is direct action. That's always how everything has happened. Gay rights, whatever. So it started with a riot. Stonewall riots. I mean, it doesn't. Direct action is definitely the way to go. And it's nice to see that has been the solution back then, too.
Yeah, for sure. Workers rising up and demanding their pay was quite simply an impossibility because it violated the principle of Ma'at. With no understanding of how to deal with the problem, officials ordered pastries delivered to the striking workers and hoped they would be satisfied and go home. Here, have a pizza party.
Well, we've heard that before now, huh?
The pastries were not enough, however, and the next day the men took to the southern gate of the Ramesseum, the central storehouse of grain in Thebes. Some broke into the inner rooms demanding their pay, and the temple officials called the chief of police, a man named Montumes. Montumes told the strikers to leave the temple and return to their work, but they refused. Helpless, Montumes withdrew and left the problem for the officials to resolve. The back pay was finally handed over after negotiations between the priests, officials, and strikers. But no sooner had the men returned to their village than they discovered their next payment would not be coming. Jesus.
You're like, wow, that sounds like shit today.
Yeah. Again, the workers went on strike, this time taking over and blocking all access to the Valley of the Kings. The significance of this act was that no priests or family members of the deceased were able to enter with food and drink offerings for the dead, and this was considered a serious offense to the memory of those who had passed on to the afterlife. When officials appeared with armed guards and threatened to remove the men by force, a striker responded that he would damage the royals' tombs before they could move against him, and so the two sides were stalemated. By this time, men were no longer simply striking over the late payments, but what they saw as a serious breach of Ma'at. The king was supposed to take care of his people, and that meant making sure that the officials who oversaw payments did so correctly and in a timely manner. It was now going on 3 years since the strikes first started, and the situation had not changed. The workers would not receive their pay. They would then go on strike, the officials would find the means to pay them, and the same scenario would be repeated again the next month. The tomb workers and artisans claimed that the injustice of the highest order was being perpetrated, and that they wanted the situation addressed. The strikes of the tomb workers and artisans were especially influential because these men were among the highest paid and most respected in the country. If they could be treated this poorly, the reasoning went, then others should expect even worse.
Right. If the middle class can suffer, then the lower class is certainly going to be worried.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's all my notes.
Wonderful. And so would you say that you have a little bit broader opinion now, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, in a very real way, I agreed with you already. but this really cements like the parallels, right? I think I mentioned it earlier. Like people want to call it capitalism because of the Industrial Revolution, but
right.
When you look at the behavior, the way that people act, then it's the same thing.
Right. You just read about a strike and stuff. I mean,
that's fantastic.
Is that really?
That's awesome. Solidarity with fucking Egyptian tomb workers.
Workers.
That's right.
Yeah, well, that's the point. Like I said, even if I'm not saying that even if they watch this, they're going to agree, but
right.
At least now I feel if they do watch it and read the blog or whatever, they're going to at least understand more where I'm coming from.
For sure,
I would hope. But
the case is made.
Case is made, and like I said, also if you want, there's not you have to, but there's a link to the culture that I say is responsible for this. You could read more about that, about the violence and wars, multiple death pits, and
right,
and the inequality of that culture. So
no, it sounds good.
Right on. Well, I appreciate your time, and go ahead and tell us about your show.
Well, yeah, I haven't done one in a long time because I've been working my ass off for the last month and a half, but I'm glad we find time to do this. I'm hoping that I will only have one more extra set of shifts because we now actually have trained new people at work. So I should be back to my regular schedule. It's The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist. I do interviews and I do a show, Red Reviews, with our last guest, Justin Clark, where we talk about books relevant to leftist theory. And my Twitter is @SkepticalLefty. And again, not that I've been very active lately, but hopefully things will get back to normal soon.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you coming on here. Definitely, I like having you join me and helping this.
No, I enjoy this. I don't have to do a whole lot. I just read what you already put down. So it's perfect when I'm busy and my brain isn't always working properly. So
right on. Well, I appreciate it too, because I think you add an aspect that wouldn't be there if I just read it myself.
This is me reading my stuff.
But also, everyone, this is in a sense to help you grasp when we start talking about state formation, our 12 series of state formation and kings, priest kings and stuff.
Yeah.
This should help grasp the concept in a way that you probably wouldn't if you just watch that stuff.
Yeah. If I could recommend to anybody, like I would say, go and take a look at the videos we did on like religion and anarchism and socialism and stuff, because you have to get an idea of how long history actually is, how much there is. And this, even if we say 7,000 years for capitalism, it's still just a little piece of our humanity. And it doesn't make the human nature argument any easier for the capitalists.
Once you understand, like you said, those other videos, it's gone. You can't. Yeah. The justification for human nature and capitalism just is absolutely not there.
Yeah,
and just like you just read, I mean, it basically said even the archaeologists would agree there really wasn't a stratification until the Neolithic,
right?
Which means 12,000 years ago. Still, so even if that was the beginning of
right,
200,000 years of 100,000 years of religion, and only 12,000 years of stratification. Yeah, it's not normal.
Yeah, that's right. Still just a very small percentage of humans' existence. So,
But I know that it's hard to to learn all this stuff. That's why, like I said, I'm a revolutionary trying to learn it so I can teach it to other people instead of, like you just said before when you were reading, how the person was talking about chiefdoms as opposed to states, and obviously they're a statist, and so when they talk about it, they're not giving you the anarchist perspective or a socialist perspective that I have, or you would have. When we look at it and we hear, just like it said, I can't remember, there was a word you used or was you read that said something like the bad parts of South America. What do you mean bad?
Right, yeah. I kind of paused in my head on that spot too, because I was like, that's not quite how I would write that.
Right. But yeah, the point is, when they write it, when a capitalist writes it, of course they think different. Yeah. And so, or a statist or whatever. So that's why I think it is a revolutionary thing for me to go back to prehistory and explain from our point of view. Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. I find this really useful in the sense that, like, you're connecting things here that a lot of people might not connect. Like, they might read the wiki page for one thing, right?
Right.
And then, but in this video, in this reference here, we've got, like, there's references to studies, there's connection to multiple wiki pages, there's all kinds of connections there that you can, if you go through, you can make those connections and you can see what's going on in a broader sense.
Right, and I think that's what's hard about it. And like I said, the capitalist certainly is not going to do that.
No, that's right. No,
a statist isn't going to try to show you how states are not good.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, I hate when they talk about Hammurabi. Oh, this is when there was civilization. Look at how great it is. Like, they instituted slavery and told me how many cases there was.
Yeah, they've totally put slavery in the law.
Yeah.
So that's cool, I guess.
Well, and they talk about minimum wage, mean that people are being robbed, obviously.
Right, yeah.
Of their labor. If you have to add that, then it's obviously not an equal share.
Yeah, exactly. Then obviously somebody's profiting off of the labor of others.
Right, so it's profiting off your labor.
Yeah.
So it's pretty hard to read that and say, oh, there's no profiting off labor. Really? It's absolutely in the law.
Yeah, that's right.
So cool. that was the point. Like I said, is to give at least an understanding. So that way, because if we did the other videos, but we didn't really address this, I think people could have still kept their other conception.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think this is a very good connection to what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks.
Yeah. And so you remember what I said, that one beginning part for all the videos, we're going to play it and
just
listen to
that first 30 seconds or whatever. Yeah.
Well, because I want people to see what we're talking about.
Yeah.
A visual, and then we'll play just the part that we're addressing, and then you're going to read about it, and then we'll talk about it. Probably talk in between, because you know me.
Of course. No, that's perfect.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time, and everybody have a great day, and stop being the capitalist.
Sounds good.
Anarchism for the win.
There we go. Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, agnosticism, atheism, antitheism, antireligionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudohistory, pseudomorality, things that are found in religion.